Rawteur, most Paradise Season 2 theories center around time. I believe our community has put enough pieces of the puzzle on the board for a picture to finally form. I think the timeline is fracturing. The conversation between Henry and Billy might be one of the most important scenes in the entire season so far. Henry talks about his wife and how whenever he would see a 50% chance of rain, he would worry. Shout out to community member Ange Creates. I didn't catch what you were saying about 50-50 at first, but once I started thinking about fractures, the 50-50 line made all the sense in the world. Now, in the scene, Henry's talking about his wife, and he says that she would often remind him that a 50% chance of rain also meant a 50% chance of sun. That wasn't just a metaphor. That's actually probability. See, Henry runs a company called Quantum Visage, which we know. His wife's name is Alex, and the philosophy that defined their relationship as it was introduced to us is probability thinking. So when the story starts referencing something called Alex, it raises a very interesting possibility. I think Alex is what Henry named the probability machine or system in honor of his wife Alex. It's a system designed to calculate probability paths for the future. Now, let's look at the nosebleeds, because something very specific happens every time we see one. They don't necessarily occur when a character makes a decision. They occur when something unexpected happens. Shout out to community member Russ Holmes for that one. Now, I'm gonna refine that to say nosebleeds happen when the timeline deviates from the current path. In this same scene with Henry, Billy, and Alex, keep in mind what I said in the previous theory video. There was no reason for Henry to have Billy come back to his house to kill him, unless Henry was shaping a future outcome. Proof. Henry predicts Billy's nosebleed. He says to Billy, "Do you think you're here with me and my wife by happenstance, or do you think you're meant to be here?" Then he repeats the probability idea again. 50% chance of rain, 50% chance of sun. Then he says the key line, "Today I'm choosing to believe in the sun." And then he follows with the line we should all focus on. "Today, I'm choosing to believe that it all worked." Meaning, he's projecting forward and assuming the outcome of the current moment turns out well in the future. Then, it goes even further when Henry tells Billy, "In which case, you may need this," and hands Billy the tissue, anticipating the nosebleed. To me, every decision in this house, in this moment, not only Billy deciding not to kill Link, they all created the fracture. It's the event, not a singular decision. Let me show you what I mean. Okay, we are following a primary timeline. Right? It's not the only possible path. There are multiple paths along this timeline, obviously. It's just the one that happened or is happening currently, right? So imagine the timeline that we're watching is currently moving along path A, right? So this is where we're headed. We're headed towards extinction. This incident on the primary timeline is Billy's nosebleed, right? And when an event causes the timeline to deviate from the path, the timeline fractures. We continue on our timeline. It's just that our path changes. So instead of heading towards extinction, maybe now we're heading towards path C, partial survival. But the fractured timeline continues to the path that we were on, path A, extinction. However, I do want to make it clear that I don't think that we're jumping between timelines in the show, nor am I saying these are the exact paths that each of these instances is sending the timeline to, right? Is just a visual example for how the paths are changing with each fracture, each nosebleed that you see. Link's nosebleed happens when Annie refuses to go with him, right? That event fractures the timeline again. In this new fracture, Annie would have went with Link. However, Xavier would have died because it's Annie who treated Xavier's wound and kept him alive. Therefore, the new fracture continues on to path C, right? Partial survival. But what happens in the primary timeline is that Annie stays at Graceland and is able to save Xavier. Therefore, our timeline, right, it stays the same, but the path now leads to B, survival. And we continue on. It makes sense? Am I cooking? Do y'all get it? Let me know. Then, months later, Xavier's nosebleed happens right as he enters the storm that causes him to crash. Another event that causes a timeline fracture. This would be timeline 4, all right? Now, in timeline 4, if Xavier would have made it to Atlanta, Annie wouldn't have trusted anyone to help her deliver the baby, and the baby may not have made it. Now, here's where this gets interesting. Stick with me because I'm about to take it back to Sinatra in a second. Now, I'm not saying that these are exactly the outcomes of each fracture, right? Just that this new fracture or any of these other ones is possibly where Sinatra is trying to get to, which is survival. We just don't know, right? Therefore, the reason Sinatra's assistant tells her when she's asking about Alex, are there any messages? Do we have an estimate? The response is, it's too unpredictable, but she's close. It's because the primary timeline might now be headed towards path D, which we can include as an unknown. Right? Therefore, although Sinatra is trying to guide the timeline to the outcome that she wants, there are all these variables out there in the world that's constantly changing the path, right? And Alex is unsure of what event needs to occur. Hopefully that made sense. Now here's the thing. We've only seen about 3 fractures so far, but there's no way to know exactly how many fractures have happened since the creation of Alex, right? For instance, the scene when Annie is talking to Link about the pills, right? Moments before, it was only Geiger and Link. And when we see Link, it looks like he's just had a fracture headache, right? He's holding his nose, he's kind of grimacing a little bit, right? Also, at the beginning of episode 4, when he's sleeping, you see him warping a little bit. Then he has the vision of what Xavier told us is a vision of something that hasn't happened yet. Now, I'd like to take us back to Henry momentarily. Remember what he says about Link. He says Link understood his quantum theories better than anyone else. So much so that he made him a partner, which means that it's very possible that Link was able to build his own Alex. Now you might say, how is that possible? He'd need money. And you're right. And he'd have it. Remember, Henry only gave Sinatra his shares. Link would still have all of his own shares in the company, right? So he might not be as rich as Sinatra, but he would certainly have access to capital. That might explain why Link behaves like someone who already knows how certain outcomes could unfold. Also, whoever said Link was the good guy in all of this? If he destroys Alex and is able to keep his machine, if he does in fact have one, then who's to say he doesn't want to be king of the world? Right? We could easily find ourselves rooting for Sinatra in season 3. Therefore, if Link has his own probability machine and Sinatra has Henry's, then Paradise might not be about saving the world. It might be about two people competing to control the future. For more Paradise Season 2 theories, subscribe and watch this playlist next.